Welcome to the Career Slay podcast, the show where we interview people who love their jobs and discuss career growth, fearless leadership, and creating a life you love. I'm your host, Kelly Pokes-Burke, a marketer turned executive coach, and I'm here to help you lead with courage and slay the fear in career. If you're a fan of these conversations and want to dive deeper into your own career and leadership questions, book a coaching discovery call with me at careerslay.com. Elizabeth Lotardo is a consultant, writer, and online instructor who helps organizations drive emotional engagement. With an undergraduate degree in advertising from Boston University and a master's in industrial and organizational psychology, Elizabeth works with senior leaders, frontline managers, and entry-level teammates to create more purpose-driven work experiences. Her clients include Salesforce, DraftKings, Hilton, and numerous Berkshire Hathaway organizations. She is also a popular LinkedIn Learning instructor and writes for Harvard Business Review. Her work has also been featured in the Wall Street Journal and on NPR. In this episode of Career Slay, I sat down with Elizabeth Lotardo to talk about her new book, Leading Yourself, which has been called a refreshingly candid playbook that helps you create a work experience worth loving right now. Elizabeth shares why self-leadership is more critical than ever, especially in times of uncertainty. We unpack how mindset, behaviors, and relationships shape your career and why focusing on what you can control gives you back a sense of agency. I loved her practical mindset hacks, like reframing challenges as this is my chance moments. It's a reminder that you are never powerless, and that joy, meaning, and purpose at work start with leading yourself first. Elizabeth, welcome to Career Slay.
Thanks for having me, Kelly.
I'm super excited to have you on the show and to talk about leading yourself. But let's start from the beginning. What was your childhood like, and what were you like as a kid?
I had the most boring childhood ever, which is such a privilege to say. I feel like when I was a kid, I was like, oh, I live in this, normal suburban neighborhood. Nothing exciting happens here. I have this typical family structure. And as an adult, I have come to appreciate the privilege that is. But I was an oldest daughter, typical pleasure to have in class, ticking all the boxes. I also had a really creative side, and I started tons of businesses. I was a Girl Scout cookie seller. I started an ice sculpture business, which was really just frozen water balloons. So shout out to my neighbors for supporting that one. But I was always pursuing creation, and much like your background, always fascinated with messaging and words and starting businesses. And I see that part of myself more clearly now that I'm an adult.
That's amazing. And to have that entrepreneurial spirit at such a young age, that's really so valuable. So what did you study in school?
I studied advertising in school. I think a lot of entrepreneurial mindset people go down that path. And honestly, I feel like a lot of kids have the entrepreneurial mindset, that natural creativity and fascination with possibility, and it gets eroded as we go through life. And some of that happened to me. I know some of that happened to you. It happens to tons of people. This ambition and drive and endless possibility starts to feel more draining than it does exciting. But I did end up studying advertising. I went to work for an ad agency. It didn't last that long. I went back and pivoted my career to study industrial and organizational psychology, and more specifically, employee engagement.
Tell us more about industrial and organizational psychology. What is that?
It sounds way more intense than it is. It makes it seem like I'm going to build a building, and I'm not. But industrial and organizational psychology is the study of psychology at work, mostly. You can study leadership, you can study employee engagement, you can study employee relations. There's an element of employment law in there, but it's this big bucket of how do our feelings impact the way business works.
Wow, that's fascinating. What drew you to that topic?
Well, I was going to get an MBA. I was listening to the episode where your friend interviewed you about getting an MBA, but I also didn't know how to use Excel. So I chose not to even try.
That's why we're in advertising, right?
Right. I was like, I cannot take economics 101. And the employee relations part, the engagement part, that was the element of the MBA I was most interested in, I was most excited to learn about. So I thought I'm just going to zoom in really far on that and opt out of Econ 101.
That's awesome. So what were some of the key roles that you held after you studied organizational psychology?
So I went into consulting after I studied organizational psychology, and a lot of my work initially was focused on sales consulting because everyone wants to grow sales. And through that study, and I'll get to how it sort of set the stage for leading yourself, through the study of salespeople and why some were successful and why some were not successful, it became clear to me that so much of the money we spend on sales training and so much of the effort we put in, even from an advertising side, to like get the perfect positioning and land on the perfect words and overcome the objection so powerfully, is eroded when people don't care. So I was in charge of, from a learning and development space, making sales training, trying to get people into it. And time again, I would realize y'all are actually great at sales. You just don't really care about this, which is a more complex problem to solve from an organizational standpoint. And that's what led me ultimately to the path of self-leadership and studying that.
Wow, that's incredible. So basically, people naturally can have that ability, but it's dependent upon whether or not they're passionate about what they're selling. Is that what you're saying?
To a large degree, yes. And if they feel like what they sell is making a positive impact on someone, that it matters, that it's for good versus like, oh, I show up, I make these calls, my heart's not really in it. And the same plays out in every profession. We know that if you're highly engaged and you believe the work is meaningful, you show up really differently and you perform better, whether that's hitting a sales number, coming up with a more creative idea, achieving a certain turnaround time. Our brain loves to know that what we're doing is making an impact. And when we can show our brain that, we unlock a whole new level of possibilities for ourselves.
I love that point because, I've been doing a lot of research on burnout. And, one of the ways to curb burnout is to have purpose, because that purpose really drives your ambition and it gives you more energy and motivates you to succeed. I love that perspective that you shared. So how did you become a LinkedIn Learning instructor? And you're like a legit LinkedIn Learning instructor. You've been doing it for quite some time. Tell us more about that.
I think we're all pretty legit.
I mean, you're legit.
But I have been doing it for some time. So I'll tell you, the crazy thing that brought me into LinkedIn Learning was this article I wrote in, I think it was 2016, about millennial retention. Nobody cares about that anymore. It's all Generation Z. But at the time, millennial retention was like the hot button HR org psych issue because all of these millennials, of which I am one, an elder millennial, were leaving their jobs. And historically, we had seen employment tenures of 10, 20 years, people spending their entire career at one company. And that changed really rapidly when millennials entered the workforce. So I wrote this article on LinkedIn called Why Millennials Keep Dumping You, an open letter to management. And it was my personal gripes with the workplace, plus the gripes of my friends of like, hey, here's why people quit their jobs. It's not just salary. It's this feeling of impact. It's being micromanaged. It's this myriad of softer things that sit beneath the surface. And the article went viral. And there were a ton of millennials that were like, yes, this is exactly it. And a ton of baby boomers were like, no one cares about your feelings. Tucker Carlson gave me a mean tweet, which I have framed in my office.
That's amazing.
But it just exploded this conversation about what is work supposed to do? Is it supposed to be this transaction or is it supposed to be more than that? And because that article went viral, I was approached by lynda.com, who was in the learning and development space, eventually acquired by LinkedIn Learning. They were building out a leadership library of content at the time. So my first course with them was how do you hire, retain, and engage top millennial talent? Lynda.com eventually was acquired by LinkedIn shortly after I joined. So I became a LinkedIn Learning instructor from the day LinkedIn Learning existed.
That's amazing. So you're OG staff. What are some of the courses that you've taught on LinkedIn Learning?
So I've taught how to hire, retain, and engage top millennial talent. It's not really as relevant as it once was, but some of my newer courses are things like finding your purpose at work, leading without formal authority, igniting emotional engagement, and leading yourself. All in this bucket of how do we make work a more meaningful experience, even when things aren't going great.
I think that's what really drew me to you, Elizabeth, is the fact that we align on that mindset. So tell us more about leading yourself. What inspired you to write the book?
So Leading Yourself was first a LinkedIn Learning course, and I created it in 2017. And I remember pitching the course to LinkedIn Learning, who had just acquired lynda.com, where I was. And I said, I think there's an opportunity to do leadership, but like inward. And I pitched it in this muddled way. And because they were in a hyper growth mode, they were like, yeah, sure. Okay, fine. Do it. Whatever. So I dove into this topic and started to explore, what does it mean to lead yourself? Instead of relying on a boss, a board, how do you look inward and navigate your work experience in a way that you're proud of and sits with your goals? So I made the first iteration in 2017 and it did pretty well, but it was among a fluffier crowd. It was a more introspective course. In 2020, the analytics behind the course really started to change. And when everyone went remote, or not everyone, a lot of people went remote, I think this question of why am I here was prompted on a mass scale. Typically that happens to us in a health crisis, when we become a parent, these sort of isolated instances where a small pocket of people are thrown into reflection mode. And in 2020, it happened to almost everyone. And this need to lead yourself when you're alone in your home office with your laptop and a mountain of deliverables started to take center stage. So I updated the course in 2020, filming remotely when LinkedIn Learning offices were closed, and it started to get traction. And I think the reason it's continued to grow and expand into what is now a book is that we recognize how dangerous it is to put your future in someone else's hands.
Yes.
Even in the hands of a great leader, even in the hands of a great company, you always have to look out for you. And no one's going to look out for you like you can. And the notion behind leading yourself is not, how do I, sabotage everyone else and make sure I come out on top, but how do I navigate my career and some of these messy things we all run into in a way that leaves me feeling proud and empowered instead of defeated and beholden.
One thing that I tell my clients is that you've got to create a strategic roadmap for your own career. We do it for our businesses. We do it for the brands that we lead. But how many of us have looked at our career in the long-term view and really mapped out, where is it that I want to go and what are my definitions of success? So how did your career journey influence the key themes and insights of the book?
That's an interesting question. And I feel my own reluctance to make a 5-year plan because so much is uncertain.
Yeah.
And I think the reason a lot of us avoid it, myself included, is because it's impossible to predict. But the suggestion I make in Leading Yourself, and I know one that you share, is it doesn't have to be this role to this role to this role to this role. You should more be looking at, how do I want to feel? What kind of impact do I want to make? Who are the people I want to be surrounded by? Those more malleable factors that a huge variety of positions could hit. But back to, how did leading myself influence my own career? So in my first job at an ad agency, I was really excited to get that job. And I became unhappy really quickly. And in looking back, a lot of that was my fault because I had false expectations of how awesome work was going to be. And then when it wasn't, I was really disappointed. I didn't see the level of power and influence that I did have, even though I was an entry level, junior account manager. And I also put so much weight in work to make me happy and fulfilled and inspired instead of knowing that is one pillar of a fulfilling life. And I saw the same thing play out in consulting where I was working on, sales training, learning and development, that area. How many people were left feeling like a victim, powerless in their job when it wasn't what they wanted to be. But I also saw a small subset of people who were somehow fine amidst great change and uncertainty and reorgs and micromanagers. They prevailed. So as I was, refining this concept of leading yourself, I started to study what are those key mindsets and what are the behaviors and what are the relationships we need to build at work and embody to create this fulfilling work experience. Because we know every workplace is going to have their fair share of imperfections.
Yeah.
So starting to put some real walls around what does it take to lead yourself? What does that look like when you're up against a micromanager, when you're not in your dream job, when there's this giant reorg and you don't know where you're going to fall? How can you look out for you and how can you make sure you're good through that?
Yeah. Oh, gosh, there's so much there. What did you conclude? What does leading yourself mean to you?
To me, leading yourself is controlling what you can control. And that is a timeless phrase, but we don't often apply it to the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
But in the book, Leading Yourself, I look at it through 3 different angles: leading yourself in your mindset, how you feel about your work, what you believe about your work, whether you are creating that sense of purpose or whether you're perpetuating the cycle of griping, which is really easy to do. I look at it from a behavior lens. How are you setting goals that you're excited about? How are you creating next plays that you uniquely are well positioned for? How are you operating in an imperfect team in a way that you're proud of? And then lastly, from a relationship standpoint, how do you manage the relationship with your boss? How do you disagree and commit when your organization is going in a different direction? And I recognize all of these topics are kind of disjointed, but the red thread that I pull through them is how do you embody this mindset of, I'm going to identify what I can control in this situation, even if it's only my own mindset. And how do you bring it to work in a way that serves you and your organization?
Yeah, let's talk about the role that mindset plays, because when you're in a tough spot at your job, mindset sometimes can be the hardest thing to flip that switch on. So what are some of the tools or suggestions that you have in changing your mindset?
I'm going to give you 2 brain hacks that have really worked for me, with the umbrella, I guess, disclosure that I'm typically a pessimist.
I'm typically an optimist, so this is good.
Well, maybe you don't need these. And maybe I should say typically a pessimist. I'm someone who generally latches on to the risk of the situation, who sees the potential flaws, who goes that path. So the 2 mindset hacks that have really helped me in the face of a very tumultuous landscape, which we are all in, is first to articulate the potential upside of something. We know our brain will latch on to risk, even if you're an optimist, without you prompting it. It's an evolutionary function to be able to identify a particular threat. So if a reorg is coming at you, your brain is going to say, what if I get fired? What if I get laid off? What if I have to work for somebody terrible and I have to do 3 people's jobs and I only get paid for half of a job and it's all going to be bad? You don't have to prompt your brain to do any of that. You do have to force your brain to articulate the upside. And even if you do it with an eye roll, the articulation still helps you. So to say, okay, there's a reorg. What if I get a great new boss? What if through this reorg, I have the opportunity to do more interesting work? What if this reorg forces me to get my ducks in a row and make a different play? What if this was just the push I needed? So being able to give the optimistic possibility a seat at the table doesn't mean you have to make a blindly optimistic decision or brush over all the potential risk, but just to allow that into your brain is a powerful thing you can do for yourself. It doesn't change any outcome. Just give yourself permission to at least humor an optimistic upside. So that's one mental hack to change your mindset if you're struggling. The second mental hack is something I learned from a woman named Tessa Romero. She's a mindset coach on motherhood, but the motherhood to businesshood Venn diagram tends to overlap more than we think in terms of skills. So I learned this in motherhood and I took it into my professional life. And the hack is called This Is My Chance. And the way you use it is whenever you are confronted with something that makes you go, ugh, like whether it's a disruption, a change, feedback, you force your brain to say, this is my chance to what? This is my chance to be more intentional with this relationship. This is my chance to lean into an uncomfortable moment and ask questions. This is my chance to show my value to my organization. That mental jogger of this is my chance has been so helpful for me in my self-leadership journey of reframing obstacles and change into opportunities.
Wow. Those are such powerful tools and things that you can do for yourself that you don't even have to have permission from your boss or anyone else around you to start to use those hacks. So that's super practical. And I love that. I'm going to start trying that especially with my daughter. This is my chance.
Oh, it's so good in motherhood. Like, This is my chance to really embody the gentle parenting I was sure I was going to do before I had a kid. This is my chance to reframe this moment. And we're not going to the park anymore, but we're going to do this. It is a life element agnostic practice that you can do this. This is my chance.
What strategies would you give someone who's having a hard time with a boss?
Self-leadership is not at odds with having a good relationship with your boss. The essence of self-leadership is controlling what you can control. Even in the relationship with your boss, you're not powerless. So what can you do to make this relationship better? So I would say the first step in self-leadership and dealing with the frustrating boss is to get clear on what behavior is actually frustrating you. We tend to generalize bosses into like good and bad. But when you get clear on what behavior is frustrating you and what you want to change, you move from griping to tactical maneuvering. The most common one is micromanaging. Behaviors like your boss is blowing up your phone, they're nitpicking you, they don't have any confidence in you to do anything. So what can you do if you're in that spot? Because you're not going to change this person. You can create a check-in cadence with your boss that says, hey, let's huddle at the start and end of every day. We know that when your boss has a place to land, they know they're talking to you soon, they're less likely to interrupt. Not 100% change, but it'll make progress. You can articulate the cost of micromanaging by saying something like, hey, I have this important project coming up. I know we've talked a lot about it. I'm going to block out 3 hours on my calendar so I can really get into it. I want to get into that, creative thinking space. I'd appreciate you, honoring that barring any emergency. Totally respectful, in your control, polite pushback. So again, no matter if your boss is a micromanager, if they always change your mind, if there's someone who ignores your emails, there is something you can do. And when you point your mind there, you become empowered.
What about bosses who are very like hands off and then they say like, I'm just empowering you, but I'm going to be over here. And
yeah, I'm empowering you with no support, direction, or resources. Right. I hope you feel empowered.
Good luck.
The first step is to recognize that we are all overscheduled. And just like you, your boss has a mountain of things to do. And saying that I'm empowering you, maybe their spin on, I don't have time to hold your hand through this. So it's up to you to differentiate there. But if your boss is truly hands off, like shout when you need me, don't be afraid to raise your hand. So often bosses are highly receptive to specific questions, to, hey, can I block out an hour to go through this proposal with you? I'd like your feedback on XYZ because I know you have experience with that. If you feel like your boss isn't supporting you, it is up to you to articulate what support looks like for you and ask for it.
Yeah. So, part of leading yourself is learning how to manage up, right? As well as managing your own plate. So let's talk more about behavior and more specifically goal setting. What advice do you have for people who are trying to set better goals?
Goal setting is a crucial part of self-leadership. And it gets like kind of an eye roll now because we all have too many goals and they're overly ambitious because they're handed to us by our manager. But those goals are not going to define your career. They will be forgotten about whether you do or do not make them, likely next year. So when we look at self-leadership and goal setting, the practice that I suggest in the book is to focus on input goals instead of output goals. Output goals are usually what our organization gives us. There are things like, oh, you're going to hit this certain target, achieve a specific turnaround time, get this many impressions, whatever it is, this outcome. But what we know is tons of things have to go right for you to hit that. And they're not all within your control. If you are supposed to hit a sales target, you can do all the right things and miss it. If a competitor drastically changes their pricing, if your industry collapses, if your organization has some giant product failure, you can do all the right things and still be in the red. And that's a really disempowering feeling. But to set an input goal, one that you own, self-leadership is to say, okay, my output goal may be this sales target, but my input goal is going to be to grow my relationships with my customers. And I know to do that, I need to follow up with them in 24 hours. I need to, have my finger on the pulse of their industry. And I need to ask insightful questions and deeply listen when they're talking to me instead of thinking about the products that I need to pitch them. That is something you can do. It drastically increases the likelihood you're going to hit a sales target. The research tells us so. But you're empowered because even if the outcome isn't what you wanted, what your organization wanted, you still have momentum. And I think so often now we lose our momentum when we don't hit these targets that are often no fault of our own.
Yeah, I remember being in corporate and having these really ambitious targets and knowing that, like, oh, the levers that we have to pull to meet that are actually pricing. Like, it's not something I have any control over. But okay, I'll do my best. So I think reframing it into the inputs and behaviors that you control, that's something really powerful. And, what we're talking about with leading yourself is really agency. It's like, what can you control in your role, in your mindset, with your behaviors, and how does that manifest into the goals that you want to achieve? So let's talk about career advice. Why is it important to find joy and meaning in our careers?
Joy and meaning are not emphasized really in career planning. We typically look at it from a logical standpoint, like what's the next typical play, junior to senior jump. Look at it from a salary standpoint. How much money can I make? That certainly matters. But when we shift our lens and say, okay, how do I feel meaning and joy? Everything changes because we know those feelings are leading indicators to performance. Whether we think something matters impacts how well we do. Whether we are experiencing joy and connection doing it determines the end result. So backing up from the things you want and exploring, how do I feel purpose-driven? How do I feel connected? How do I feel lighter and joyful, which is a tall order now? That can help you open doors that may not have been possibilities with the lens of what's the next logical step or what salary do I want to make.
So what advice would you give to job seekers in 2025? We mentioned that the economy is weird at best. The job market is so uncertain. How would you advise job seekers?
The suggestion I would have is to recognize the agency you do have in this process. Job seeking feels like the antithesis of agency because you have to put your whole self out there, openly admit you want something, and whether you get it or not is the decision of someone else. And it is emotionally grueling, and it is so easy to lose your sense of agency in that moment. So if you're there, which a lot of job seekers are, my counsel would be to step back, realize the power that you have, and don't be afraid of a pivot. Don't be afraid to redo your resume, start from scratch, try a different industry, upskill yourself, reach out to a recruiter, go in to an organization on LinkedIn via the manager that the open role would be reporting to. Try these other avenues. You have power in this situation, and it is up to you to pivot, to change, and to find a new way in.
Yeah, you gave like at least a handful of different ways that people can start approaching the job search process differently. I mean, tapping into your network is number one. And it starts with going back to leading yourself. It starts with the internal work before you go external. It's like if you know who you are and what you want and your skills and your strengths, then it becomes a lot easier of a conversation to sell that to somebody else.
Absolutely. And so often interviews are awkward and inauthentic because we haven't done the inner work and we don't really know why we're valuable. So answering that feels weird and we don't really know where we want to go. So that's awkward too. So if that has been your experience, the only way out is through self-reflection, through self-leadership and deepening your understanding of what success looks like for you.
So looking back, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Buy Bitcoin. No, I'm just kidding.
Was Bitcoin around back then?
I think it was, I thought it was fake in college.
Oh, God.
Everyone was like, no, that's not real. So my advice would be to buy Bitcoin if I was talking to 20-year-old Elizabeth. But in all seriousness, I think the advice I would give my younger self is you have more power than you think. In this moment, it is up to you. In all moments, it's up to you. And there's always something you can do if you don't like the circumstances as they are.
That's amazing.
Retweet.
If you had to sum up your career in 3 words, what would that be?
Windy, creative, and purpose-driven.
Tell me more.
So windy, like I said, I've reinvented, I guess, really 3 times now. So maybe I'm on path for 9. Yeah. I always felt awkward reinventing and like taking career breaks and like going on this book tangent. But what I found is that right after that, everything gets better. And we're sold this belief that you have to have your career in this straight line. So I've learned to embrace the windiness of it and recognize that there's power on the other side of a top and turn. And then secondly, I forget which order I said these in.
Creative, I think.
I was going to say purpose-driven or creative. Creative, I've always been like a creator. Love LinkedIn learning courses, of books, of campaigns, of training programs. Like that is what really fills my cup, is to create something meaningful that makes some difference in someone's life. And purpose-driven is closely connected to that. I fall into the same like traps of, oh my God, my inbox is so overloaded. I have so much to do. I don't know how I'm going to reckon with all of this. But at best, in the most fulfilling moments of my career, I see how my work makes a difference to someone else. And that's what keeps us going as people.
Elizabeth, thank you for the work that you do. I think leading yourself is going to change people's lives. How can people find you?
ElizabethLotardo.com. My book is now out everywhere books are sold. You can grab yours. I also put out a lot of content on LinkedIn and have a LinkedIn learning course on leading yourself, amongst other things.
Thank you so much for joining me here on Career Slay.
Thanks for having me, Kelly. Your story is inspiring, and you have absolutely championed what it means to be a self-leader.
The Career Slay podcast is a co-production of Career Slay and Weld Reply. This episode was produced by Asia Lane and Michael Burke, with editing by Tyra Greer and Michael Burke. If you like the show, subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you're ready to level up, pivot, or lead with confidence, book a coaching discovery call with me at careerslay.com.